Good morning, and thank you for joining us at this week's Sunday Drop-In with Croes-y-Parc Chapel. And this week we're going to be thinking about life when things are getting really tough for us, and we're going to start with words from Psalm 126.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us. I want to take you to something I read recently in a book by the writer and speaker Rob Parsons. He describes an incident from his childhood. He was playing in a Saturday football match. One of his friends, Carl, suddenly fell over when going for the ball. The game continued for several minutes until people eventually realised Carl wasn't just play acting in the hope of being awarded a free kick. An ambulance was called, which took forever to get there because there were protest marches that day. Rob and 3 other children sat outside the emergency room, and then Carl's parents turned up. His mum was crying uncontrollably, and his dad had to virtually drag her to the room where they were working on her boy. An hour later, the doctor came out and told Rob that his young friend was dead, killed by an undetected heart abnormality. It all seemed so unfair. That night, there was a knock at Rob's parents' door. It was Carl's dad. He was angry and demanded to know every detail of how his son died. Rob says, "I answered him as best I could. But even as a child, I knew that Carl's father wanted an answer to a question that nobody on the face of the earth could provide. He wanted to know why his son was dead." Rob then talks about the sombre mood at Sunday school the next day, and the Sunday school's teacher's prayer, "Lord, help us to deal with what we cannot understand." Reading this, I was struck by the wisdom of this teacher. From the theological perspective, I dare say, he understood perfectly what had happened. Carl was born into a broken, damaged world, and in a body for which there was no guarantee as to its reliability. He was the victim of circumstance. He suffered the consequences of living in a world which had rebelled against its creator. He could have told his class that, but he didn't. Not because it isn't true, but because it's unhelpful. People are grieving. They don't want a theological statement about why there's death and suffering. They want to know why the person they loved has gone. Carl's dad didn't want to hear about sin and the fall of man. He wanted to know why his son went out to play football and never came back. Misery and loss are no respecters of persons. They can seem completely arbitrary, taking the good and the bad, the young and the old, and at any time. The Sunday school teacher didn't offer his kids theological platitudes. Instead, he spoke about Job. Job suffered terribly, and for about 30 chapters of that book, he's variously pleading with God to tell him what's going on and demanding an explanation. Alongside that, he had his friends, known these days as Job's comforters, who had a theological answer, but unfortunately not the right one. But what often goes unnoticed about these guys is that the first thing they did was sit in silence next to Job. They sat with him like that for a whole week before they said anything. Wonderful display of love and compassion. If only they'd never opened their mouths and talked theology, they would have been a fabulous example to us all. I expect some, if not many of us, will have to deal with grief or suffering in the coming year. Perhaps our own, perhaps the pain of other people. So what does someone need in that situation if it's not a theological answer? They need to know their pain is shared. They need to know their sense of outrage and their sense of loss is shared. They need someone to hold them close, to cry with them, to cry for them. Maybe they need someone to join them in their pit of misery, as Job's friends initially did, just sitting in silence next to them. They need someone to love them. In other words, they need someone to be Jesus to them. Jesus knew all the theological answers, but when his best friend died, he didn't feel the need to share those answers. He cried too. God bless and stay safe.
There's a time for tears and a time for pain. Time to hurt while the grief remains. There's a time when peace seems so far away, yet still God holds us on that day. There's a time to weep from the ache inside. Time to show what we've tried to hide. There's a time to doubt and to wonder why, and hold each other as we cry. God of comfort, God of the cross, joining us here to weep. Stand beside us, grieving our loss, and be for us the hope of peace. There's a time to smile at the memories. Time for thanks as we meet to grieve. It takes time to heal, so we pause today to mourn, remember, and to pray.
Thank you for being with us. And if you find that you're struggling at the moment, perhaps with grief or loss of any kind, and there's a way that we can support you or we can pray for you, then please do get in touch with us. Until next Sunday, we wish you God's blessing. Goodbye.